In 2005, Buckingham Palace made the British public a promise. It was written down. It was official. It was released to every newspaper in the country, and it said in plain English that this woman would never be called Queen. 17 years later, she was crowned in Westminster Abbey, in front of a global audience of hundreds of millions, wearing a crown on her head, and the world was told to call her Queen Camilla. The promise was gone, quietly, without a single explanation. And here is the part that will stay with you. While Camilla spent 3 decades of her life fighting for a title, there was another woman inside that same palace who never fought for anything at all, who never demanded, never briefed, never asked. And today, that woman holds something Camilla, for all her crowns and jewels and hard-won titles, has never quite been able to buy. This is the story of 2 women, 2 completely different roads to power, and one uncomfortable truth this family has never been able to escape. A title can be granted with a signature, trust cannot. Before we begin, a small request. If you enjoy these stories, please subscribe. It means the world, and it's how these videos reach more people. And tell me in the comments which royals you'd like me to cover next. I read every single one. Now let's get to the story. Let me take you back to where it started. Cast your mind back to February of 2005. Charles, then the Prince of Wales, was finally going to marry the woman he had loved for more than 30 years. It should have been a happy announcement. It was not, because the country was, to put it mildly, not ready. Diana had been dead less than 8 years, and in the public mind the wound was still raw. Camilla was not simply a woman marrying a prince. She was, in the eyes of millions, the third person in that famously crowded marriage, the villain of the story. Diana herself had told the world in that unforgettable BBC interview that there were 3 of them in the marriage, so it was a bit crowded. Everybody knew exactly who she meant. So the palace had a problem, a very serious one. How do you let the future king marry the most unpopular woman in Britain without the whole institution catching fire? And their answer was a deal. On the day the engagement was announced, Clarence House released a statement, and buried inside it was one of the most consequential sentences in modern royal history. It said that when Charles became king, Camilla would not be called Queen. She would be known as HRH, the Princess Consort. Princess Consort, not Queen, a lesser title invented for the occasion, designed to soothe a nation that was not ready to see Diana's rival wearing Diana's crown. That was the promise, public official in writing. And here is what almost nobody realizes. That promise was not a legal document. It was not an act of parliament. It was a press release. It was a public relations decision made in a moment of fear to get the country through a difficult wedding. And a press release can be quietly deleted. Even the wedding itself carried the weight of that discomfort. It was not a grand ceremony at Westminster Abbey. It was a civil ceremony at Windsor Guildhall, modest by royal standards. And Queen Elizabeth, Charles's own mother, did not attend it, not out of cruelty and not out of spite. As Supreme Governor of the Church of England, her position on a marriage like this was complicated, and she stayed away from the ceremony itself. She did attend the blessing at St. George's Chapel afterwards, and she hosted the reception. But the image lingered, and it told you everything about the atmosphere. Even inside the family, this was a marriage the institution was managing rather than celebrating. That was Camilla's starting point. Married to the future king and promised, in public, that she would never share his crown. And then came 17 years of the hardest, most thankless work imaginable. Because whatever you think of her, and people have very strong feelings, you cannot deny what Camilla did next. She did not run. She did not complain to the press. She did not write a book or sit down with opera or air a single grievance. She simply got up, day after day, year after year, and did the work. She built genuine causes. She became a real, serious voice on domestic violence and on sexual assault, And she did it not from a distance but with real conviction, eventually revealing that she herself had been a victim of assault as a teenager. She built a portfolio of over 90 charities and organizations. She showed up. She endured. And slowly, agonizingly slowly, the hostility began to soften. Not into love, never into love, but into something else. Respect. A grudging, reluctant, very British acceptance that this woman was not going anywhere and that she was, whatever else, doing her job. But the promise still stood. Princess Consort. It was there in black and white, waiting for the day Charles took the throne. And then, on a February morning in 2022, that promise died in a single paragraph. It was the 70th anniversary of Queen Elizabeth's accession, and she released a message to the nation. In it, after 70 years on the throne, she made a request. She said it was her sincere wish that, when the time came, Camilla would be known as Queen Consort. Sincere wish. 2 words from a 95-year-old monarch, and 17 years of public promise simply evaporated. Now, think about how devastatingly clever that was. Because who was going to argue with her? Who was going to look at Queen Elizabeth in her Platinum Jubilee year in the final months of her extraordinary life and say no? Nobody. Not the government. Not the newspapers. Not the public. She had spent 70 years earning exactly this kind of authority, and she spent a little of it right at the end on this. It was not a command, it was not a law, it was a wish, and it was absolutely unstoppable. 7 months later, Queen Elizabeth was gone, Charles was king, and Camilla was Queen Consort exactly as the late Queen had wished. And then something else happened quietly that almost nobody noticed at the time. After the coronation in May 2023, when Camilla was crowned in Westminster Abbey, the word consort began to disappear. The palace stopped using it. The official communication simply started saying Queen Camilla. Not Princess Consort, not even Queen Consort. Queen. The woman who had been publicly promised she would never wear that word had it, in full in the end. 17 years of waiting, 30 years of hostility, and she got there. She won. And notice how it was done. Not with an announcement, not with an explanation. Nobody stood at a podium and said, "We are breaking the promise we made you in 2005, and here is why." There was no apology to the public, no acknowledgement that the deal had changed. The word consort simply started vanishing from palace paperwork, the way a name quietly disappears from a company website when someone leaves. That is how this institution actually works, and it is worth understanding, because it explains almost everything else you will ever see them do. The monarchy does not announce its power moves. It does not hold press conferences to explain internal decisions. It speaks through action rather than words. Things simply stop being said, and other things simply start being said instead, and one day you look up and realize the world has quietly changed shape around you. And the lesson buried in that is chilling if you are anyone inside those walls. If a public, written, official promise can be dissolved with a sentence and a silence, then nothing you are told is truly permanent. Not a title, not a role, not a place at the table. Which is exactly why the second half of this story matters so much. So why, then, does this story not feel like a victory? Because while all of that was happening, while Camilla was fighting a decades-long war for a word, another woman inside that same family was doing something entirely different. She was not fighting for anything, and she was winning something far bigger. Let me tell you about Catherine. Here is what makes her story so remarkable and so completely unlike Camilla's. Catherine never had to campaign. She never had to negotiate a title. She never had to survive a hostile press campaign or endure decades of being called a villain. She married William in 2011 and the country simply liked her. From the beginning, almost effortlessly. But do not mistake that for luck, and do not mistake it for ease. Because what Catherine has quietly built over the last decade is genuinely serious, and it deserves to be understood. Look at her early childhood work. Most royals lend their name to a cause, turn up once a year for a photograph, and that is considered enough. Catherine did something different. She founded the Royal Foundation Center for Early Childhood. She brought in neuroscientists. She commissioned actual research. She launched a national campaign, Shaping Us, built on data and evidence, arguing that the first 5 years of a child's life shape everything that follows. That is not ribbon cutting. That is policy work. That is a member of the royal family walking into rooms where being a princess is not enough to make people listen, and earning the right to be there through substance. And then in early 2024, everything changed. Because in March of that year, Catherine did something no one saw coming. She sat alone on a bench, in front of a single camera, and told the world she had cancer. And the reaction was extraordinary. Not polite, not managed, real. People genuinely wept. Flowers appeared outside Kensington Palace without a single press release telling anyone to bring them. For many observers, it was the first time since Diana died that the country had felt that kind of raw, unmanufactured emotional connection to a royal. Think about what that means for a family that has spent decades being accused of feeling like a collection of waxworks. Here, suddenly, was a real person. A young mother, frightened, telling the truth in her own words on her own terms without a spin doctor in sight. And the way she handled what came next only deepened it. She did not panic. She did not rush back for the cameras. She protected her children ferociously. She took her time. And in January of 2025, she announced she was in remission. And then this year, she did something that told you everything about who she is. She climbed the 3 highest mountains in Britain in 24 hours in atrocious weather to raise money for the Royal Marsden, the hospital that treated her. And here is the detail that says it all. She told nobody in advance. No announcement. No press release. She simply went and did it, and only when it was finished did the world find out. Do you see the difference now? Do you see the 2 completely different roads? One woman spent 30 years fighting to be given a title. The other climbs mountains in the rain and tells nobody. And here is where it gets genuinely fascinating, because the palace has noticed, and the king has noticed. Look at what has actually, verifiably happened over the last 2 years, while everyone was distracted by other dramas. In January 2025, William and Catherine were announced as joint patrons of the Royal Marsden, one of the great cancer hospitals in the world, and a deeply personal choice. In June 2025, something far more significant happened, and almost nobody outside royal circles understood its meaning. King Charles granted William and Catherine the power to issue royal warrants. Now, that might sound like a technicality. It is not. Royal warrants are the centuries-old system by which the Crown places its official seal of approval on British businesses. It is one of the oldest and most tangible pieces of soft power the monarchy possesses. And the king handed it to the Waleses. Their private secretary said they were delighted to be able to recognize British industry, creativity, and skills. That is not a ceremonial trinket. That is a lever of actual institutional influence. And then, in November of 2025, came the moment that revealed just how far Catherine's influence now reaches. When the decision was taken to strip Prince Andrew of his royal titles, one of the most seismic acts of Charles's reign, reports in People magazine indicated the king had the backing of William, of Catherine, and of Camilla too. It was a unified family decision, but royal experts speaking afterwards were struck by something. One commentator noted that Catherine had reportedly been credited before with the famous line about recollections varying, the late Queen's masterful response to the opera interview. His view was that William had substantial input, with Catherine's strong support. Read that again. When this family faces its hardest, most consequential decisions, Catherine is now in the room. Not because she demanded it, not because she negotiated for it, but because she earned it quietly over 14 years, one engagement at a time. The royal correspondent Camilla Tominey has called her the monarchy's greatest asset. Another writer at the same paper called her the jewel in the crown. And they are not talking about her wardrobe. They are talking about the fact that when this institution needs to be trusted, she is the one people believe. And now hold both of those stories in your head at once, because this is the point. Camilla has the title, Catherine has the trust. And here is the uncomfortable truth this family has never been able to escape. A title can be granted, a crown can be placed on a head, a press release can be written, and then quietly deleted and then rewritten again. Titles are, in the end, negotiable. The 2005 promise proved that beyond any doubt. But affection cannot be granted. Trust cannot be issued by letters patent. No monarch, however powerful, can sign a document that makes a nation love someone. That is the one thing in this entire institution that cannot be arranged. And I want to say something in Camilla's defense here, because it would be easy to be cruel, and I think cruelty would be wrong. Camilla did not steal anything. She was handed a nearly impossible situation, and she navigated it with more grace than almost anyone could have managed. She spent 30 years being the most vilified woman in Britain, and she never once fought back publicly. She never sold her story. She never played the victim. She built genuine causes and stood up for genuine victims, drawing on her own private pain to do it. She was, by any measure, loyal. And she is not being pushed out. Let us be very clear about that, because a lot of channels will tell you otherwise, and it simply is not true. Camilla is queen. She remains patron or president of over 90 charities. Her title has not been touched. Her position has not been reduced. She stood beside Charles at the Andrew decision, and her backing mattered. What has happened is not a demotion. It is something subtler and in a way sadder. It is simply that the future is arriving, and it does not belong to her. And there is a detail about that future that almost nobody talks about. And when you hear it, the whole story lands differently. Because there is a day coming, and none of us like to think about it, when Charles will be gone. And on that day, everything changes in an instant. William becomes king the moment his father's heart stops. There is no ceremony required, no vote, no waiting. It is immediate and automatic. And in that same instant, Catherine becomes queen. And Camilla. Camilla becomes the Queen Dowager. It is a real title and an ancient one reserved for the widow of a monarch. It is respectful, it is dignified, and it is unmistakably a title that means your time is over. The word dowager does a lot of quiet work. It means you were, not you are. And here is the part that stops you cold. On that day, whether Camilla keeps any of her duties, any of those 90 charities she has spent decades building, will not be her decision at all. It will be William's, the stepson, the man who, according to one royal author, still merely tolerates his stepmother, the man who, by several accounts, she is said to be a little afraid of. Whatever happens to Camilla in the end will be entirely at the discretion of Diana's son. Sit with the sheer poetry of that for a moment. 30 years of struggle, a promise broken in her favor, a crown finally placed on her head in Westminster Abbey, and when it is all over, her future will be decided with a word by the boy whose mother she is blamed for hurting. There are some circles in this family that simply never break. Because Charles has been open about his vision of a slimmed-down monarchy, a smaller, sharper institution that justifies itself through work rather than spectacle. And in that vision, the people who matter are the people the public actually trusts. Every poll says the same thing. William and Catherine carry more public confidence than the rest of the family combined. That is not favoritism. That is arithmetic. And Charles, a man facing his own mortality while carrying a crown, is doing the maths. And there is one final layer to this, and it is the most haunting of all. Because there is a ghost in this story, and there always has been. Diana has been gone for nearly 30 years, longer than some of the people mourning her have been alive, and yet she still shapes every single room in that palace. She shaped the 2005 promise because the country was not ready to see her rival crowned. She shaped the caution, the fear, the careful management of Camilla's image for 2 decades. And now, in the strangest twist of all, she shapes the future too. Because when the country wept for Catherine in 2024, when the flowers appeared and the emotion poured out unmanaged and real, what people were responding to was something they had not felt since 1997. A royal who felt like a human being, someone who told the truth plainly, who put her children first, who did not seem to be performing. Catherine is not trying to be Diana. She is her own woman entirely, and she would be the first to say so. But the connection she has with the public runs through the same channel Diana carved out, and the palace knows it. So here is the final irony, and it is almost too perfect. The institution spent decades managing Diana, then trying to move past her, then trying to forget her. And in the end, the woman the king is quietly building the future around is the one who reminds the country most of what they loved about her. You cannot outrun a ghost, you can only make peace with it. So what is the answer to all this? I think it is simply this. In 2005, the palace tried to solve a human problem with a piece of paper. They wrote a promise, hoping that a word, princess instead of queen, would fix something that words could never fix. And 17 years later, they took the paper back, hoping the country would not notice. They did notice. They just stopped caring quite so much because time does that. But underneath, nothing had actually changed. Camilla got the crown. She never got the country. And Catherine, who never asked for a single thing, got both without ever having to negotiate for either. That is the lesson buried in all of this, and it is one that reaches far beyond palaces. You can be given a title, you can be handed a position. Someone can sign a paper and make you important, but nobody can sign a paper that makes people believe in you. That is earned in 1,000 small, unglamorous moments. Showing up, doing the work, telling the truth when it would be easier not to, climbing a mountain in the rain and telling nobody. Camilla learned that the hard way, over 30 painful years. Catherine never had to learn it at all. She simply lived it. And in the end, the crown itself, the actual object, the gold and the jewels, is the least important thing in this whole story. Because a crown only means something if the people looking at it believe in the person wearing it. That is the one thing the palace can never promise, and the one thing that has never, ever been for sale. Thank you so much for watching. If this story gave you something to think about, please share your thoughts in the comments, and let's keep them kind. Do you think the palace was right to change the promise in 2022? And do you believe Catherine's quiet approach is the future of this monarchy? Until next time, take good care of yourselves.